Hello, and welcome back to Shadow Sleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy chilling tales that visit in Shadow Sleep, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, Under Maintenance. Sorry for the inconvenience. That was what the sign taped across the elevator doors said. Again, I had only moved into the apartment building a couple of weeks earlier, and this was already the second time the elevator had stopped working. I hoped it was only bad luck, and not a sign that everything in the building was slowly falling apart. The last thing I wanted after a full day at work was to climb several flights of stairs. Still, I tried looking at the positive side. I rarely went to the gym, so walking up to my apartment was probably more exercise than I normally got in an entire week. I pushed open the heavy stairwell door and carefully caught it before it slammed behind me. The stairwell was narrow, dim, and badly maintained. Cracks ran across the concrete steps, and parts of the metal railing were covered in rust. The walls had once been painted white, but years of dirt and damage had turned them gray. The building was old, but it did not seem as if anyone had attempted to repair or update the stairs for decades. The climb was tiring, but it was not unbearable. By the time I reached the 4th floor, however, I was breathing harder than I wanted to admit. I opened the stairwell door and stepped into the hallway. My apartment was conveniently located beside the stairwell exit. That was one of the few good things about the elevator breaking down. I only had to turn the corner before reaching my door. The number was attached at eye level in small metal letters. 4B. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The excitement of having a new apartment was already beginning to disappear. During the first few days, I had felt proud every time I came home. It was not large or luxurious, but it was mine. I had arranged the furniture myself, hung a few paintings, and told myself it was the beginning of a more independent life. After only a couple of weeks, I was noticing the problems more than the possibilities. The first thing I noticed each day was the smell. Musty was probably the correct word for it. The apartment always smelled slightly damp, even when the windows had been closed and the air conditioner was running. It was not strong enough to be unbearable, but it never completely went away. I dropped my work bag onto the old couch and walked toward the kitchen. A bowl of pasta was sitting on the counter. I stopped. The pasta had dried around the edges, and a layer of orange oil had collected at the bottom of the bowl. I must have left it out the previous night. It was disappointing because I hated wasting food, but it was also exactly the kind of careless thing I might do when tired. I picked up the bowl and emptied the pasta into the trash. The food fell into the bin with a wet slap. I placed the bowl in the sink, which already contained several dishes I had ignored for the past few days. My laziness was on full display. In my defense, the dishwasher had stopped working shortly after I moved in. The elevator was broken, the coffee maker had suddenly died, and the air conditioner made a horrible grinding sound whenever it ran. At this rate, I expected the refrigerator to give up before the end of the month. Since I was trying to behave like a responsible adult, I decided to wash the dishes before the pile became even larger. 1 pasta bowl. Clean, 1 pot. Clean, 7 forks. Mostly clean. I reached for the final bowl in the sink. It was filled with water. The water was completely clear, and the bowl itself was already spotless. There was no food stuck to it. Why had I left it soaking? I stood there with my hands in the sink, trying to remember filling it. Nothing came to me. Maybe I had placed it there without thinking. I had been exhausted lately, and my memory became terrible whenever I did not sleep properly. Sometimes I entered rooms and immediately forgot why I was there. It was slightly unsettling. But forgetting about a bowl was not exactly proof that anything strange had happened. I poured out the water, washed it again, and placed it on the drying rack. Then I opened the refrigerator to search for dinner. The lid was missing from the pickle jar. The open jar sat on the top shelf, filling the refrigerator with a sharp vinegar smell. I stared at it. How had I forgotten to replace the lid? More importantly, where was the lid? I searched the shelf, the door compartments, and the floor beneath the refrigerator. Nothing. A nervous warmth spread through my stomach. I closed the refrigerator and looked around the kitchen. The painting near the dining area appeared slightly tilted. Had it always been like that? The leather chair near the living room window also seemed farther away from the glass than usual. I stood still, studying the apartment. Something felt wrong. Then, I became annoyed with myself. I always did this. Whenever one small thing seemed unusual, my imagination immediately created a larger problem. Maybe building maintenance had entered the apartment. Perhaps there had been a leak, and a worker had filled the bowl to test the water. Maybe he had bumped the painting while checking the wall. Perhaps he had moved the chair to reach a pipe. The missing pickle lid was harder to explain, but maybe the worker had helped himself to a pickle as payment. It was a ridiculous idea, but it made me feel slightly better. I called the front desk. The concierge answered after several rings. I asked whether maintenance had been scheduled to enter my apartment. No, the concierge said. Nothing was scheduled for your unit today. Could someone have gone inside without notifying me? You would have received a call or written notice. I looked at the tilted painting. Did you see anyone unusual entering the building or walking around the fourth floor? There was a pause. No, the concierge sounded impatient. They reminded me that I could file a report if anything had been stolen. I looked around. Nothing valuable appeared to be missing. Only the lid from a pickle jar. I could imagine the police officer's expression if I tried reporting that. Thanks anyway, I said before hanging up. Nothing had been stolen. Nobody had been seen entering. The door had been locked when I arrived. There was no reason to worry. Yet the feeling remained. Something in the apartment seemed different. Perhaps my mind had noticed a missing object without consciously identifying it. That could explain the anxiety. My subconscious might have detected the change while the rest of my brain was still searching for it. I listened to myself thinking and almost laughed. Nothing had happened. Why was I acting this way? Still, I decided to search the apartment. Only to be safe. I started in the living room. The closet doors would not slide because a pile of boxes and random belongings blocked the bottom track. I kicked several items aside until I could open them. I checked the coats hanging inside. All 3 were there. Then I realized I was wearing one of them. That made 2 in the closet and 1 on my body. Correct. I pushed aside shoes, bags, and cleaning supplies. Nothing appeared missing. Next, I searched the bathroom. I did not know what kind of criminal would ignore the television and steal toothpaste, but at that point, I was checking everything. The medicine cabinet looked normal. The shampoo, towels, toilet paper, and cleaning products were all there. The toilet seat was raised. Had I left it that way? Probably. Finally, I entered the bedroom. The bed was badly made, which was normal. My laptop was charging on the desk where I had left it. Pens were scattered around the room. The closet contained nothing unusual. I even checked behind the hanging clothes. Empty. I felt embarrassed. I had searched my entire home because a chair looked slightly out of place and a pickle jar was missing its lid. I needed food and sleep. Before dinner, I took a long shower. I stayed beneath the hot water for almost 45 minutes. The heat relaxed my shoulders and cleared some of the thoughts from my head. Hot water had a way of boiling worry out of me. Afterward, I cooked another batch of spaghetti. The anxiety slowly disappeared as the evening continued. I sat on the couch with a large bowl of pasta in my lap and watched a boring film. I fell asleep before the credits began. The elevator was still broken when I returned from work the following evening. I stared at the maintenance sign for a moment before entering the stairwell. 4 floors was beginning to feel like too much. By the time I reached my hallway, my legs hurt and my shirt was sticking to my back. The heavy stairwell door slammed behind me, sending an echo through the corridor. I walked to apartment 4B and removed my key. Before placing it into the lock, I hesitated. Had I locked the door that morning? I tried the handle. It did not move. Good, I unlocked the door and pushed it open. Light from the hallway spread across the dark living room. At first, everything looked normal. Then, I saw the chair. My leather chair was on the opposite side of the living room. It had not been pushed a few inches. It had been moved across the entire room. A violent alarm seemed to ring inside my chest. I dropped my work bag in the doorway and rushed downstairs. The concierge looked up in surprise when I reached the front desk. "Someone entered my apartment," I said. "They moved my furniture. You told me I would be notified if anyone went inside." The concierge denied it. "No employee entered your unit." My chair was moved across the room. "I don't know what to tell you. Maintenance must have been in there. Maintenance has not entered that apartment since the previous tenant moved out." "So who moved my chair?" The concierge stared at me. "I don't know, but it was not one of our workers." I no longer felt safe returning upstairs alone. I called the police. They took far too long to arrive, and when they finally came, 2 officers followed me into the apartment. They searched every room. They checked the closets, behind the curtains, beneath the bed, and inside the shower. Nobody was there. No windows had been broken. No valuables were missing. One officer asked if anyone else had a key. I told him I was the only person with one. He asked whether I had given a copy to a friend, family member, or former partner. No. They looked at me as if I had forgotten some obvious detail. One officer asked whether I was certain the chair had not always been in its current position. I showed him marks on the floor where the chair's legs had previously rested. He gave a small shrug. Without signs of forced entry or theft, there was very little they could do. They suggested installing a security camera. "For your peace of mind," one of them said. I hated the phrase. It sounded like a polite way of saying they believed the problem existed only inside my head. Still, a camera was better than nothing. I drove to the nearest electronics store and purchased a small, motion-activated camera. It connected to an app and allowed me to view the apartment from my phone. During the drive home, I tried imagining the person who might have entered my apartment. What kind of criminal broke into a home only to move furniture. They had not stolen money, electronics, or food. Were they trying to frighten me? Why me? How had they entered? The door showed no damage. The window was several floors above the ground and remained locked. Someone could have used a ladder, but that seemed almost impossible without being noticed. Maybe maintenance really had entered and was lying to protect the building from a complaint. That explanation felt more realistic than a stranger secretly moving my chair. I placed the camera on the table beneath the living room window. From there, it could see most of the room, the front door, and part of the kitchen. I plugged it in and pressed the power button. A small white light appeared. After several minutes of adjusting the settings, camera 1 was connected to my phone. I could now watch the live feed whenever I wanted. That evening, I made pasta again. While eating in front of the television, I developed a painful headache. It was probably caused by stress, although the wine I drank certainly did not help. I had 2 large glasses of water. I tried watching a show, but I could not concentrate. I repeatedly rewound scenes because I kept missing the dialogue. Every time I looked away from the television, my eyes moved toward the leather chair. I wished it could speak and explain what had happened. By midnight, exhaustion had become overwhelming. I wanted to sleep, but the idea of closing my eyes while someone might enter the apartment frightened me. I had nobody nearby to stay with. I could not afford a motel. This apartment was all I had. I checked the front door several times. Locked, unlocked, locked again. I left the kitchen light on so I would not have to walk through complete darkness if I needed water. I searched the apartment again, even though the police had already done it. Every room was empty. I took photographs of the furniture, paintings, and kitchen. If anything moved even slightly, I would have proof. The bedroom felt like the safest place. I pushed the bed toward the wall farthest from the door. It was probably unnecessary, but at least I would have more time to react if someone entered. I lay beneath the blanket and scrolled through my phone. The camera app was set to send a loud notification whenever motion was detected. That made me feel slightly safer. I remained awake for a long time. Sometimes, when I try to sleep, I attempt to let my thoughts move on their own. I stop choosing what to think about and allow images and memories to appear naturally. I can never maintain that feeling for long. Eventually, I notice the thoughts and begin controlling them again. That night, I wanted to let go. I wanted my mind to become quiet. I must have fallen asleep because I suddenly woke with my heart beating strangely. The room was dark. A question appeared inside my head. Did I check the shower? I had checked it earlier. The police had checked it too. Still, I could not ignore the thought. I slipped out of bed and walked to the bathroom. The door was partly open. I reached through the gap and switched on the light. The old bulb flickered and made a faint buzzing sound. The shower curtain was closed. A small movement passed through it as air entered the room. My heartbeat seemed to move into my throat. I grabbed the curtain and pulled it aside slowly. Each new part of the bathtub came into view. The shampoo bottles, the soap, the metal drain, nothing else. The bar of soap was still wet. I stared at it. How long did soap normally stay wet? I had taken a shower the previous night, not that evening. Had I showered that morning? I could not remember. I turned off the light and stepped into the hallway. The living room was dark, except for the weak light coming from the kitchen. Something about the darkness made me uneasy. A person could be standing around the corner, and I would never know until I entered the room. These were childish thoughts. I returned to the bedroom and shut the door. The blanket felt safer. Outside light passed through the window and created moving shadows of bare tree branches across the ceiling. I watched them sway gently. My eyelids became heavy. Then another thought appeared. Did I check under the bed? I did not want to look. My common sense told me there was nothing there. My paranoia forced me to check anyway. I leaned over the edge and searched the darkness beneath the bed. Nothing. I lifted my head, embarrassed. Then I noticed the mirror on the closet door. It reflected me in the space beneath the bed. A dark figure was lying underneath, staring back at me. Heat flooded my body while my skin became ice cold. I turned quickly. There was no figure. Only a pile of clothing and several buttons reflecting the light. I almost laughed. I was turning ordinary objects into monsters. The room felt unusually cold. I checked the window. It was open slightly, allowing a narrow stream of air inside. I closed it and returned to bed. The cold remained. I remembered keeping an extra blanket beneath the bed. Without looking, I reached one arm underneath and searched for it. My hand touched only the floor. The blanket was gone. I was too exhausted to investigate. I curled beneath the comforter and closed my eyes. When I woke, daylight filled the room. I checked the time and immediately panicked. I was late. My alarm had not gone off. Then I remembered placing it in the closet, so I would be forced to stand up and switch it off. I must have turned it off without fully waking. I dressed quickly and rushed out of the apartment. During my lunch break, I opened the camera app to review the previous night's footage. Nothing had appeared unusual that morning, but I had been in such a hurry that I could have missed something. The app showed that the motion detector had activated once. 1:29 a.m. My stomach tightened. My hands began sweating. I selected the recording. After several slow seconds, the image loaded. The front door was visible, along with the dim kitchen. A person walked into view. I threw my phone onto the table. Panic flooded through me so quickly that I could barely breathe. After several seconds, I forced myself to pick up the phone and watch again. The person was me. I walked from the hallway into the kitchen, switched off the light, and returned toward the bedroom. The clip ended. Relief washed over me. I had nearly frightened myself into a medical emergency over my own reflection. Still, I did not remember turning off the kitchen light. Had I been sleepwalking? I had never done that before, but stress and lack of sleep could cause strange behavior. That could explain everything. The moved chair, the missing lid, the open window, the wet soap. Maybe I had been moving things while asleep and forgetting by morning. I laughed quietly. I really was causing my own problems. To prove that nothing unusual was happening, I opened the live camera feed. My apartment appeared empty and still. The furniture was exactly where I had left it. For the first time in days, I relaxed. Near the end of my work shift, my phone made a sound I had never heard before. A notification appeared. Camera 1 has been disconnected. I tapped it immediately. The live feed showed a black screen, unable to connect to camera 1. Dread returned. The drive home felt longer than usual. I considered sleeping in my car, but that was not realistic. I could not allow fear to chase me away from my own apartment. When I entered the building, the elevator was still out of service. I climbed the stairs quickly. At the door to 4B, I stopped. What would I find inside? Would the couch be upside down? Would the refrigerator be in the bedroom? Would a stranger be sitting in the chair? I checked the app again. Still disconnected. I gripped the door handle, unlocked it, and entered. Everything looked normal. The camera was still on the table. It remained plugged into the wall. The chair had not moved. The paintings were straight. No new dishes sat in the sink. Yet the apartment seemed unfamiliar. I checked the living room closet. The coats were there. I checked the kitchen. No food had been left out. The television was off. The hallway light was on, but I thought I had left it that way. I searched the bathroom. I looked inside the cabinets, beneath the mat, behind the shower curtain, and even inside the shampoo bottles. Nothing. The bedroom also appeared normal. All of my belongings were present. I returned to the living room. Something was wrong. I knew it. Perhaps the change was so small that my eyes kept passing over it. I checked behind the paintings and beneath the couch cushions. I opened the freezer and the oven. Nothing. The silence inside the apartment felt threatening. For a moment, every thought disappeared, and I became fully aware of myself standing alone in the room. Everything was in its proper place. Still, the apartment felt wrong. It was as if the rooms themselves had been moved. It was as if I was the object that did not belong. I remembered the camera. Maybe the building's internet connection had failed. I picked it up. The white power light was off. The outlet must have stopped working. I carried the camera into the kitchen and plugged it into another socket. It still did not turn on. I pressed the power button repeatedly. Nothing, cheap piece of garbage, I muttered. I threw it into the trash. Then I opened the refrigerator to find the steak I had purchased. The refrigerator was nearly empty. I stared at the shelves. I had gone shopping recently. There should have been vegetables, milk, eggs, and several meals. They were gone. The steak was gone, too. There was no way I had eaten everything. I searched the cabinets for pasta because it was apparently the only food that remained in my life. Most of the shelves contained old bags of flour, sugar, and other ingredients I did not remember buying. After searching, I found a box of ditalini. I hated that pasta shape, but it was all I had. I placed water on the stove. While waiting for it to boil, I tried slowing my breathing. My chest felt tight. I looked through the window at the apartment building across the street. Its windows seemed lower than I remembered. That did not make sense. Buildings did not change. I stepped into the hallway and examined my front door. 4B. I stared at the number. 4B? A thought struck me. This was not my apartment. I lived on the 3rd floor. Didn't I? I looked along the hallway. There was a welcome mat near the next apartment that I did not remember seeing. I rushed into the stairwell and went down 1 floor. Apartment 3B was in the same position. I tried my key. It did not turn. I tried every key on the ring. Nothing. What was I doing? Of course, I lived in 4B. How could I forget the floor of my own apartment? I returned upstairs. The 4th floor hallway appeared much longer than before. The walls seemed to stretch into the distance, bending slightly as if the entire corridor were breathing. Dizziness overcame me. I leaned against the door to 4B and closed my eyes. Slow breaths. In, out. When I opened my eyes, the hallway was normal again. I entered the apartment. Fresh air might help. I walked toward the living room window and hit my leg against the table beneath it. I opened the window. Cold air entered. Then I froze. The camera was gone. I had placed it on that table. I searched beneath the furniture. Nothing. Where was it? I moved into the kitchen. The pasta was scattered across the floor. I did not remember dropping it. The refrigerator door was open. I closed it, then noticed the milk sitting inside. I picked it up. It felt warm. I decided to throw it away. When I opened the trash bin, I saw the camera. It lay beneath several pieces of garbage. I stared at it. I had thrown it there. Hadn't I? Yes. I remembered carrying it to the kitchen and throwing it away after it failed to turn on. Why had I just spent several minutes searching for it? My thoughts began moving too quickly. Someone had moved my chair. Someone had thrown away my camera. No, I had thrown away the camera. I had moved the chair. Had I? I was the only person with a key. Nothing had been stolen. Nobody was hiding inside. Yet something was happening. I began feeling sick. The room tilted. My legs became weak, and my vision blurred. I reached the couch and collapsed onto it. Questions continued circling inside my head until they no longer formed complete thoughts. When I opened my eyes again, several hours had passed. My head was pounding. Sweat covered my face. The oven clock read 10:04. Had I really slept that long? I checked the front door 3 times. Locked, I switched off the kitchen lights and went into the bedroom. My phone screen would not turn on. The battery must have died. Or perhaps the outlet beside the bed had stopped working too. I threw the phone into the closet. I climbed beneath the blanket and rolled onto my back. Light from outside cast shadows of leafless branches across the ceiling. I watched them move. The same shadows, the same branches, the same room. I looked toward the mirror on the closet door. My reflection was staring back at me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I realized something. The reflection was not lying on its back. It was sitting upright. I remained completely still beneath the blanket. The person in the mirror sat at the edge of the reflected bed, facing me. Its face was mine. Its clothes were mine. Its bedroom looked exactly like mine, except the number printed backward on the open door behind it was not 4B. It was 3B. The reflected version of me slowly raised one finger to its lips. I wanted to turn away, but my body would not move. The other me smiled. Then I heard a soft sound beneath my bed. Someone breathing. The reflection looked down toward the floor. Its smile widened. I do not know which one of us saw the other first. I only know that one of us does not belong here. Story 2. I am writing this in pieces across several nights because I can no longer trust my memory from one day to the next. Some parts may not fit together perfectly. Dates may be wrong. I may repeat myself or leave out details that should be important. That is not a mistake. That is the reason I am writing any of this down. Every night, before I begin, I read what I wrote the night before. Sometimes the words feel familiar. Other times they seem as though they were written by a stranger who knows things about my life that I have forgotten. There is one thing I never forget. Daniel, I taught high school for 18 years. Before I say anything else, I need to be honest about the kind of teacher I was. I was not a good one. I knew my subject well. My students usually passed their exams, and the school administration praised my results. Parents requested that their children be placed in my classes because they believed I was strict and effective. For years, I believed that made me a good teacher. It did not. I was arrogant. I was impatient. I treated kindness as weakness and humiliation as motivation. When students failed to understand something, I never considered that I might have explained it badly. I assumed they were lazy, careless or not intelligent enough to deserve my attention. I valued the students who made me look successful. The others became problems I wanted removed from my classroom. 4 years ago, a boy joined one of my classes. I will call him Daniel. He was 12 years old and small for his age. His uniform always looked slightly too large, especially around the shoulders. He had dark hair that fell into his eyes and pale skin that made him look tired even in the morning. Daniel was quiet, in a way that made other people uncomfortable. Some children are shy, but still smile when spoken to. Daniel did not. He rarely spoke unless someone forced him to answer a direct question. Even then, his voice was so soft that I often told him to repeat himself. He never joined conversations with the other students. At lunch, I sometimes saw him sitting alone with a notebook open in front of him. He was always writing something, but he closed it whenever anyone came near. He struggled with basic work. Simple equations confused him. Instructions had to be repeated several times. He took far longer than the other students to copy notes from the board. Sometimes he stared at a question for 10 minutes without writing a single word. No one told me he had a learning difficulty. I have spent years wondering whether that would have changed the way I treated him. The honest answer is that I do not know. I was not the kind of man who searched for reasons to become kinder. Instead, I scolded him. At first, I corrected him in the same sharp voice I used with other students. Then, I began losing patience. I called him slow. I told him he was not paying attention. I accused him of wasting time. When he failed to complete an exercise, I made him stand beside his desk while the rest of the class continued working. The other students watched. Some laughed. I heard them, but I did nothing. One afternoon, I asked Daniel to solve an equation on the board. I had not properly explained the method. Most of the class looked confused, but Daniel was the easiest student to blame. He stood in front of the board holding the chalk. His hand shook slightly. He wrote the first number, stopped, and looked back at me. I remember becoming angry, not because he had done anything wrong, but because his confusion made me feel as if I had failed to control the room. "Are you going to stand there all day?" I asked. Daniel looked down. "I don't know how," he whispered. Several students laughed. I should have stopped them. Instead, I said, "Of course you don't. You never know anything." The laughter became louder. Daniel did not cry. He did not argue. He simply turned and looked at me. His face was completely still. That look disturbed me, though I would never have admitted it at the time. There was no anger in his eyes, no embarrassment. He looked as though he were memorizing me. I told him to leave the classroom. He stood outside the door for the rest of the afternoon. I could see part of him through the narrow glass window. He remained in the same position, holding his notebook against his chest. I continued teaching as though he were not there. On another day, I told him he was dragging the whole class down with him. I said it in front of everyone. I remember the exact words. "You are not only wasting your own time, Daniel, you are wasting everyone else's time. The whole class has to slow down because of you." He looked at me with that same still expression. Then he wrote something in his notebook. 3 weeks later, Daniel stopped coming to school. The office informed us that his family had left town. There was no farewell, no request for school records that I heard about, no goodbye from his parents. I felt relieved. That is difficult to admit, but it is true. I believed my classroom would become easier without him. Within days, another student was sitting at his desk. I stopped thinking about Daniel. For almost 2 years, I did not say his name. Then the dreams began. The first dream seemed harmless. I was standing inside my classroom after school. The lights were off, but enough gray light came through the windows for me to see the desks. Every desk was empty except one in the back corner. Daniel sat there. His head was lowered, and he was writing in the notebook. I called his name. He did not look up. I began walking toward him. The classroom seemed normal, but no matter how many steps I took, the distance between us did not change. I walked faster. Then I ran. Daniel remained in the back corner, writing calmly. I could hear the pencil moving across the paper. The sound became louder as I ran, even though he never came closer. I woke with my heart beating hard. The next night, I had the same dream. Then again, the night after that. Every detail remained unchanged. The empty classroom, the desk in the corner, Daniel writing, me walking toward him without getting any closer. After a week, I began dreading sleep. I tried leaving the television on. I drank until I became tired. I took pills my doctor prescribed. Nothing helped. Whenever I slept, I returned to the classroom. Then Daniel stopped remaining inside the dreams. The first time I saw him while awake, I was teaching an afternoon lesson. I turned from the board and looked toward the back row. Daniel was sitting there. He wore the same oversized uniform. His notebook was open on the desk, but he was not writing. He was watching me. I stopped speaking. The class became quiet. I blinked. The seat was empty. One of the students asked if I was feeling well. I said I had lost my place in the lesson and continued teaching. After that, I saw him more often. Sometimes he appeared near the classroom door. Sometimes I saw his reflection in a window. Once I found him standing at the end of an empty hallway. When another teacher walked past, Daniel disappeared behind her. I knew he could not actually be there. I assumed guilt had finally caught up with me. Around the same time, my memory began failing. At first, the changes were small. I forgot where I had parked my car. I entered rooms without remembering why. I bought groceries and then returned home to discover I had purchased the same items the day before. I blamed stress and lack of sleep. Then I began forgetting names. I forgot the name of a colleague who had worked beside me for more than 10 years. I forgot the name of the street where I lived. Once, I stood outside my own house and could not remember which key opened the front door. The worst part was that the memory loss was selective. I forgot important moments from my marriage. Whole holidays disappeared. I looked through family photographs and could not remember where they had been taken. But I never forgot Daniel. His face remained completely clear. I remembered the way his hair fell across his forehead. I remembered the shape of his handwriting. I remembered every word he had spoken to me. Most of all, I remembered everything I had said to him. The rest of my life was becoming soft around the edges. Daniel remained sharp. It felt as if something were cleaning space inside my mind and carefully preserving only him. My wife noticed the changes before I admitted them. She found me standing in the kitchen one evening, holding a plate and staring at it. "What are you doing?" she asked. I could not remember. Another time, I asked when our daughter would be coming home from university. My wife stared at me. Our daughter had graduated 3 years earlier. After that, I went to a doctor. He ordered blood tests, brain scans, memory tests, and several examinations I no longer remember clearly. Everything came back normal. There were no tumors, no signs of dementia, no damage that could explain what was happening. The doctor asked about stress, depression, and alcohol. I told him about the dreams, but not about seeing Daniel while awake. He listened and suggested therapy. Then he looked directly at me and said there was no physical reason for my memory problems. That was the night the notebook appeared. I returned home after the appointment and found it sitting on the desk in my study. It was a simple black notebook with worn corners. I knew it immediately. Daniel had carried one exactly like it. My wife was downstairs watching television. No one else lived with us, and no one else had a key to the house. I called her into the room and asked where the notebook had come from. She looked confused. She said she had never seen it before. I opened it. The handwriting was small and careful, a child's handwriting. Every page contained the same sentence. You said I was slow. The words appeared again and again. 200 pages. You said I was slow. You said I was slow. You said I was slow. Some pages had the sentence written only once in the center. Others were completely covered, the words written over each other until the paper had nearly torn. I dropped the notebook. My wife picked it up and began reading. She asked who Daniel was. For a moment, I nearly lied. Then I told her. I told her how I had treated him. I told her about the classroom and the things I had said. I expected anger. Instead, she looked frightened. She asked why I had never mentioned him before. I said I had forgotten. The moment the words left my mouth, I understood the terrible truth. I had forgotten him until he wanted to be remembered. I know how this sounds. I know it is easy to say I created the notebook because of guilt. Perhaps I wrote it myself during some kind of episode. Perhaps my mind filled the pages while I slept. I wish that were true. 10 days ago, I decided to find Daniel's family. School records provided an old address, but the house had been sold. After asking around, I found a woman who had lived near the family. I told her I had taught Daniel and wanted to know how he was doing. She became silent. For several seconds, I thought the call had ended. Then she asked if no one had told me. Daniel had died 6 weeks after leaving the school. He had a heart condition. According to the neighbor, the condition had been difficult to detect. Stress could make it worse. His parents had blamed themselves because they had never informed the school about his health problems or his learning difficulties. They believed they had failed to protect him. In the final weeks of his life, Daniel barely spoke. He carried a notebook everywhere. He wrote in it constantly. No one ever asked what he was writing. His family had not moved away to begin a new life. They left town to bury their son near his grandparents. For almost 2 years, I had imagined Daniel living somewhere else. I assumed he had entered another school. I told myself he had forgotten me just as easily as I had forgotten him. But he was never somewhere else. He never left that classroom. After the call, I sat in my study until morning. The black notebook remained on the desk. I read every page again. At the end, I found something I had missed. On the inside of the back cover, a new sentence had appeared. You will learn slowly. The next day, I went to school. I had already taken medical leave, but I still had a key to the building. My old classroom was empty. A younger teacher used it now. The walls had been repainted, and the desks were arranged differently. Daniel's desk was gone. I stood near the board and tried to remember the lesson I had been teaching on the day I made him stand outside. I remembered everything. The equation, the weather, the smell of cleaning chemicals in the hallway. the sound of students laughing. I even remembered the exact piece of chalk in my hand. When I turned toward the door, Daniel stood outside the glass. He held the notebook against his chest. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. A small piece of white chalk lay on the floor. Since then, chalk has disappeared from the classroom regularly. One piece every week. The current teacher complained about it in the staff room. She believed students were stealing it as a prank. I did not tell her the truth. 2 nights ago, the dream changed. I stood in the classroom as usual. Daniel sat in the back corner. I began walking toward him. For the first time, the distance became shorter. Each step brought me closer. I wanted to stop, but my body continued moving. The sound of his pencil grew louder. When I reached the desk, Daniel stopped writing. He looked up. The notebook was open in front of him. On the page was a list of memories. My wedding day, my daughter's birth, my parents' faces, the first house my wife and I bought, my mother's funeral. Each memory had a line drawn through it. Daniel closed the notebook. Then he stood. I woke in my bedroom. He was standing beside the bed. This was not part of the dream. I was awake. I could feel my wife sleeping beside me. I could hear a car passing outside. Daniel stood in the darkness. His skin looked pale, and his uniform hung loosely from his body. He was not carrying the notebook. He held a stick of white chalk, the same kind used in my classroom. He extended it toward me, not like a weapon, like an offer, like a student giving a teacher one final chance to explain something correctly. I did not take it. I was too afraid. Daniel remained there for several seconds. Then he lowered his hand. His expression did not change, but I felt that I had failed another test. When I turned on the lamp, he was gone. The chalk lay on my pillow. Last night, my wife asked what year our daughter had been born. It was a simple question. I knew the answer once. I had been in the hospital room. I had held my daughter only minutes after she entered the world. I had written the date on forms, birthday cards, and family calendars for more than 20 years. But when my wife asked, there was nothing. I stood in the kitchen with my mouth open. I watched her expression change from patience to concern and then to fear. She has been married to me for 22 years. I could not remember the year our child was born. Later, I tried to remember my wife's middle name. I could not. I tried to picture my father's face. It was gone. But I remembered Daniel's voice. I remembered him saying, "I don't know how." I remembered the way he stood at the board with the chalk trembling in his hand. I remembered every cruel word I said in response. The design of what is happening finally became clear to me. I am not simply losing my memory. I am being emptied. Something is removing my life piece by piece. The unimportant memories disappeared first. Then names. Then places. Now it is taking the people I love. Daniel remains untouched inside my mind because he is not part of what is being removed. He is what will remain. I believe the chalk was an offer. Perhaps he wanted me to write an apology. Perhaps he wanted me to stand in front of the classroom and finally teach the lesson properly. Or maybe he wanted me to understand how it felt to stand before someone, knowing the answer was expected, while nothing came. Tonight, I placed the chalk beside this notebook. I have been staring at it for hours. My wife is asleep upstairs. At least I think she is my wife. I know that sounds terrible. I recognize her face, but her name has begun slipping away from me. I wrote it on my arm earlier so I would not forget. The ink is still there, but the letters no longer feel connected to a person. The black notebook is open beside me. A new sentence appeared while I was writing this. Too slow. I can hear someone moving in the hallway. Small footsteps. A piece of chalk is dragging across the wall. I should go and look. Before I do, I need to write one final thing while I still understand why it matters. Daniel, I am sorry. You were not slow. I was. I was too slow to notice you were struggling. Too slow to understand that fear can look like silence. Too slow to see that humiliation does not teach anyone. Too slow to realize that a teacher can destroy a child without ever raising a hand. I do not know whether this apology means anything now. The footsteps have stopped outside the door. There is writing on the other side. I can hear the chalk moving. I do not need to open the door to know what it says. You said I was slow. The handle is turning. I can no longer remember my daughter's face. I cannot remember the school where I taught. I cannot remember my own age. But Daniel's face is clearer than ever. He is standing in the doorway now. He is holding out the chalk again. This time, I am going to take it. I think he wants me to write my name on the board. The problem is, I can no longer remember what it is. Story 3. It started the way these things usually start, with my daughter coming home from school on a Friday afternoon and acting as though her entire future depended on me buying some plastic toy I had never heard of. Mum, I need a Labubu. I was standing in the kitchen at the time, grating cheese over a bowl of leftover spaghetti. I only half heard her because the television was on in the living room and the grater was making that rough, scraping sound against the block of cheese. For a moment, I thought she had said baboon or balloon. Or maybe it was another new word from YouTube that I was already too old and tired to understand. A what? I asked. A Labubu, she repeated. She said it with the exhausted patience of an 8-year-old who had just discovered that her mother knew absolutely nothing about modern culture. Everyone has one, she added. Literally everyone. I looked at her over the cheese grater. And what exactly is a Labubu? She dropped her school bag near the kitchen door and came closer. It's a little monster thing, she explained. It's cute, but creepy cute. It has big ears and fur and these teeth. She pulled her lips back with 2 fingers to show me. 9 teeth, she said. Sharp ones. Wonderful, I replied. Because every child needs a furry creature with serious dental problems. She ignored me completely. For the next 10 minutes, she explained blind boxes, secret versions, rare collections, and how some of the toys could be sold for loads of money. Apparently, you did not know which figure you were buying until you opened the package. She also told me that a boy from school named Sam said the ghost version could grant wishes or curse you. Sam had not been completely clear about the details. This was the same Sam who once convinced half the class that swallowing watermelon seeds would cause vines to grow inside their stomachs. I was not interested in adding his supernatural research to the family budget. But my daughter had that look. Every parent knows it. It is the expression children get when a trend has taken over the school playground and they are certain that being the only one without it will destroy their social life forever. I told her we would think about it. She followed me through the house for the rest of the evening, showing me videos and pictures on her tablet. Every few minutes, she would explain another important fact. Some Labubus wore little clothes. Some had different colors. Some were smiling. Some looked angry. The rare ones were worth hundreds. By bedtime, I knew far more about the ugly little things than I ever wanted to know. The following morning, because I am weak and easily controlled by a small human with large, sad eyes, I agreed to take her to Pop Mart. The shop was packed. There were bright boxes covering almost every wall. Shelves were filled with small creatures with shiny eyes, strange smiles, and colorful clothes. The whole place felt like a toy store, designed by someone who had eaten too much sugar and then had a nightmare. Children moved between the displays, while parents waited with the tired expressions of people who had already accepted defeat. My daughter went directly to one shelf. She did not stop to look around. She picked up a box from something called the exciting Macaron series and turned it slowly in her hands. "This one," she said. "How can you tell?" "I can feel it." "Feel what?" "That it's lucky." I looked at the sealed cardboard box. It felt like every other box on the shelf to me. We paid for it. She could not even wait until we reached the car. By the time I unlocked the doors, she had already ripped away the plastic and opened the top of the box. She pulled out a small foil bag, tore it apart, and lifted the toy into the light. Her face fell. "Oh," she said. "It's only a normal one." I leaned closer. Normal was not the word I would have chosen. The creature had grayish-brown fur, long pointed ears, and round black eyes that appeared slightly too wet. Its little mouth was stretched into a grin, revealing 9 sharp white teeth. There was nothing openly frightening about it. Plenty of children's toys were designed to look strange or mischievous. But something about its smile bothered me immediately. It looked pleased with itself. It looked like it knew a joke that I had not been told. There was also a dark mark beneath its chin. I assumed it was dirt or manufacturing error. I remember thinking I would wipe it off when we got home. My daughter held it close to her chest. "What are you going to call it?" I asked. She studied its face. Boo. From that moment on, Boo went everywhere. He sat on the kitchen table during breakfast. He rested on the arm of the sofa while we watched films. He watched her complete her homework. He watched me prepare dinner. He watched us watching him. My daughter spoke to Boo constantly. At first, I thought it was normal childhood behavior. Children give their toys personalities. They create voices, jobs, families, and entire histories for them. One of her teddy bears had once spent 3 weeks working as a dentist. Another had been arrested for stealing biscuits. So I was not concerned when she began talking to Boo. The difference was that she did not treat Boo like a toy. She treated him like a real friend who had moved into our home. One night, she pushed the carrots around her plate and refused to eat them. "What is wrong with the carrots?" I asked. "Boo doesn't like them. Boo is not eating them. You are. He says they smell bad." I looked at the doll sitting in her lap. Well, Boo can start paying rent before he gets opinions about dinner. My daughter looked at me sharply. Then she glanced down at the doll. "He says you're rude." I laughed. What else could I do? Children say creepy things without meaning to. They have no filter and an almost perfect sense of timing when it comes to making adults uncomfortable. For several days, nothing else happened. Then, one night, I woke at around 2 in the morning. I did not hear a crash or a scream. There was no obvious reason for me to wake up. I simply opened my eyes with the strong feeling that something in the house had changed. You may know that feeling. You wake suddenly, and although you cannot explain why, your body has already decided that something is wrong. I remained still for a while and listened. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The heating pipes clicked inside the walls. The refrigerator hummed downstairs. Everything sounded normal. Still, I could not return to sleep. I got out of bed and walked into the hallway. My daughter's bedroom door was slightly open. As I passed it, I heard whispering. I stopped. At first, I thought she was talking in her sleep. Then, I heard a pause, followed by more whispering. I pushed the door open with 2 fingers. She was sitting upright in bed with her legs crossed beneath her. Boo was balanced on the duvet in front of her. Her back was perfectly straight. Her head was lowered towards the doll. She whispered so quietly that I could not understand the words. Then she stopped. She waited. After several seconds, she nodded as though someone had answered her. Then she whispered again. I stood barefoot in the hallway, feeling as though I had accidentally entered a private conversation. I almost went inside. I almost said her name. Then she smiled at Boo. It was a small, secretive smile. I stepped backwards and returned to my bedroom. The next morning, I told myself she had been half asleep. Maybe she was dreaming. Maybe she was playing. I told myself many sensible things because sensible explanations are much easier to live with. That afternoon, I found her sitting beneath the large tree at the end of our garden. The tree stood too close to the fence and caused constant problems. It dropped leaves, branches, and bird mess across the grass. Every year, I promised myself that I would hire someone to cut it back. And every year, I forgot. My daughter was still wearing her school uniform. Her tights were dirty around the knees. Boo sat beside her on the ground. At her feet was a destroyed bird's nest. Twigs had been broken and spread across the mud. Feathers and small pieces of eggshell were scattered around it. 3 baby birds lay in the center. Their tiny bodies were curled inward. Their skin was pink beneath the thin layer of down. Their beaks were open as if they were still waiting for their mother to feed them. My stomach turned. "Oh, sweetheart," I said as I approached. "The nest must have fallen." She did not look at me. She ran 1 finger slowly along Boo's ear, pressing the fur flat. "Yes," she said. Something in her voice made me stop walking. Then she added, "Boo didn't like the noise they made in the morning anyway." She spoke casually, flatly, as though she were telling me that the post had arrived. I stared at her. I waited for her expression to change. I expected sadness, fear, guilt, or even confusion. Anything that looked like my daughter. But she remained completely calm. There was mud beneath her fingernails. Boo sat beside her with that same pleased smile. I wanted to grab the doll and throw it into the outside bin. I should have done it then. I did not. Instead, I helped her stand and told her to wash her hands. I used a small shovel to remove the nest and the dead birds. I placed everything into a bag and threw it away. While I worked, I kept feeling as though something was watching me from the house. When I turned, Boo was sitting on the kitchen windowsill. I did not remember my daughter carrying him inside. Over the next few days, I began finding feathers around the house. 1 was stuck to the windowsill in her bedroom. 2 lay on the upstairs landing. A small gray feather was on the bathroom floor, damp from someone stepping on it after a shower. I told myself they must have come inside on our clothes or shoes. There had been dead birds in the garden. It was unpleasant, but not impossible. Then I found a small pile beneath her bed. At first, I thought it was stuffing from an old toy. My daughter had sometimes pulled damaged toys apart and hidden the mess because she knew I would complain. I crouched, reached beneath the bed, and dragged the pile into the light. The feathers were gray and brown. They were clumped together and stuck with something dark and dry. Then I saw a beak. It was tiny and crushed, almost hidden beneath the matted feathers. I dropped the pile immediately. My hand struck the floor. For a moment, I could not move. That evening, I sat my daughter down in the living room. I made sure my voice remained gentle. Whatever was happening, she was still my little girl. She sat on the sofa with Boo tucked beneath one arm. His face looked out over her elbow. "I need to ask you about the birds," I said. She blinked at me. "The birds in the garden, and the feathers beneath your bed." Her eyes moved towards Boo. Then she looked back at me. "I'm not angry," I said, although I was frightened enough to feel sick. "I only need to understand what happened." She stroked the top of Boo's head with her thumb. He didn't like them. "Boo?" She nodded. "Did you hurt the birds because Boo asked you to?" For the first time, she showed some emotion. She looked offended. "I helped him," she said. "He said I could be his best friend." That was the moment I stopped pretending it was only a phase. I waited until she was asleep that night. I stood in the doorway and listened to her breathing. Boo lay beside her pillow. The doll's black eyes reflected a thin line of light from the hallway. I stepped into the room and picked him up. The fur felt slightly warm. I carried him downstairs. I wrapped him in 2 pillowcases and sealed them with tape. Then I placed the bundle inside a shoebox. I taped the box shut, placed it inside a bin bag, and then put that bag into another one. I carried everything into the loft. My daughter hated the loft ladder. She had always been frightened of the dark space above the ceiling. Even if she somehow climbed up there, she would never find the box. I pushed it behind stacks of old baby clothes, Christmas decorations, school papers, and a broken fan we had been meaning to throw away for 6 years. I climbed down and locked the loft hatch. The following morning, my daughter did not ask where Boo was. She did not cry. She did not search the house. She did not have a tantrum. She only watched me. At breakfast, she stared over the top of her cereal bowl. In the hallway, she watched while I found her shoes. During the drive to school, I saw her eyes in the rearview mirror. She looked calm and patient. It felt as though she were waiting for me to admit what I had done. By lunchtime, I could not take it anymore. I climbed into the loft. The shoebox was exactly where I had left it. The tape remained sealed. The bags were not torn. Nothing appeared to have moved. I carried the box into the light and opened it. The pillowcases were still wrapped in the same shape. But when I untaped them, they were empty. There was only dust inside and a faint smell of wet fur. I searched the loft. I moved boxes, opened bags, and checked behind the Christmas decorations. Boo was gone. That night, I found him sitting on my daughter's desk. He was facing the bedroom door. I did not stop to think. I grabbed him, carried him downstairs, and took him into the garden. I placed him on an old metal shovel near the tree. Then I poured lighter fluid over him. The liquid soaked into the fur. I struck a match. For a moment, the flame moved between my fingers. Then I dropped it. The fire caught immediately. The fur curled. The plastic beneath it turned black. The long ears began to bend and melt. For several seconds, I thought I had solved the problem. Then the screaming started. It did not come from the doll. It did not come from the garden. No neighbor opened a window. No dog barked. The scream was inside my head. It was high, sharp, and constant, like metal being pushed through my teeth. I covered my ears with both hands, but the sound did not become quieter. The flames moved strangely. They did not rise and dance like normal fire. They jerked in short, sudden movements, almost as if the doll were shaking beneath them. The air tasted metallic. It was like holding a battery against my tongue. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to stay. I watched until the doll had become a black lump on the shovel. When the flames finally went out, the screaming stopped. I dug a hole beneath the tree. I scraped the ashes and melted plastic into it, covered them with soil, and pressed the ground flat. When I returned to the house, everything felt too quiet. My daughter remained in her bedroom all evening. She did not come downstairs for water. She did not use the toilet. She did not ask for another hug before sleep. Around midnight, I went to check on her. She was lying flat on her back. Her eyes were open. I stepped closer and said her name. She slowly turned her head towards me. It looked as though she had been waiting. "You made Boo angry," she said. Then blood began pouring from her nose. It came suddenly and heavily, running over her lips and down her chin. I rushed towards her and grabbed tissues from the bedside table. I called her name and tried to sit her upright. Before I could hold her properly, her entire body went limp. I called an ambulance. She has been in hospital for 4 days. The doctors cannot explain what happened. There is no injury, no infection, no sign of seizure activity that would explain her condition. Her heart rate is normal. Her breathing is normal. Her scans are normal. She looks as though she is sleeping. She simply does not wake up. I sat beside her bed for hours, holding her hand and begging her to open her eyes. Doctors asked whether she might have taken medicine or swallowed something dangerous. They tested her blood. They found nothing. Yesterday, I returned home to collect clean clothes, her favorite blanket, and a few other things from her room. When I entered the bedroom, Boo was sitting on the windowsill. He was clean. His fur was dry. His ears were perfect. There were no burn marks. The dark stain beneath his chin was still there. He smiled at me. I did not scream. I had moved beyond screaming. I picked him up with both hands. I carried him downstairs and opened the back door. Then I placed him on the step. I did not threaten him. I did not try to burn him again. I did not call him a cursed little monster, though I wanted to. I knelt in front of him and whispered, "Please, bring her back." The doll continued smiling. "Take me instead." The next morning, Boo was gone. The pressure inside the house had disappeared. The strange heaviness in the air was gone. The rooms felt normal again. Then the hospital called. My daughter had woken up. She did not remember the birds, the feathers, or anything that had happened after we bought the doll. She was tired, confused, and extremely hungry. The doctors called it a miracle. For several hours, I allowed myself to believe them. I brought her home this morning. She laughed at something on television. She asked for toast. She hugged me so tightly that I cried into her hair. She seemed completely normal. I told myself it was over. Boo had accepted the exchange, but perhaps he had only wanted an apology. Maybe my offer had been enough. Maybe cursed dolls did not understand promises in the same way people did. I have been writing everything down because I am afraid that if I do not, I will convince myself none of it happened. About an hour ago, just before bedtime, my daughter said something. She was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. She looked half asleep. Then she looked past me towards my bedroom door. "I don't think you'll like the dark place," she whispered. My whole body became cold. What did you say? She yawned and hugged her teddy bear closer, where Boo lives when he's not talking. I could barely force out my next question. Why would I go there? She looked confused. He said, you promised. Then she walked back to her bedroom as if she had said nothing unusual. I've had a pounding headache ever since. At first, I thought it was caused by stress. Then I noticed that the pain becomes stronger whenever the lights are switched on. The darker the room becomes, the better I feel. I have also started hearing a scratching sound inside the walls. It began near my daughter's room. Now it is behind my bedroom. A few minutes ago, something tapped against the window. My room is on the second floor. I did not look outside. I closed the curtains and sat on the bed. My daughter is asleep. I checked twice. She is breathing normally. There is no blood. There is no doll beside her. When I returned to my bedroom, I found something on my pillow. A small gray feather. It was wet and stuck to the fabric with a dark liquid. I threw it away. Then I noticed a mark beneath my chin while looking in the bathroom mirror. It is only a faint gray smudge. I tried washing it off. It did not move. The headache is becoming worse. Every few minutes, the room seems to lose light, even though the lamps are still on. The corners look deeper than they should. Sometimes I think I see two pointed ears rising from the darkness behind the wardrobe. I keep remembering what I said on the back step. Take me instead. I thought I was offering my life. I thought Boo would kill me and return my daughter. But maybe death was never what he wanted. Maybe he needed someone to go where he came from. I have been searching online for stories about labubus, curses, dark places, and dolls that return after being destroyed. Most of what I found was nonsense. Then I discovered a post written by someone whose account no longer exists. It was only one paragraph. It said the toys were not alive. They were doors. The smile was not a mouth. The 9 teeth were locks. The post warned that if the toy began speaking through a child, it had already chosen someone else in the home. It also said never to make a promise. Promises gave it permission. I heard my daughter whispering a few minutes ago. I went into her room. She was asleep, but her lips were moving. I leaned closer. She was counting. 1, she whispered. A pause. 2, another pause. She continued until she reached 9. Then she smiled without waking. When I returned to my room, the door closed behind me on its own. The lights went out. My phone still works, but the torch does not. The screen is the only light left. The bedroom seems larger now. The walls are too far away. I can smell damp fur and wet soil. Something is moving beneath the bed. I can hear small claws scratching against the floor. The gray mark beneath my chin has spread down my neck. My teeth hurt. Not all of them. Only 9. There is someone standing in the corner. At first, I thought it was Boo, but it is too tall. Its ears almost touch the ceiling. Its body is covered in gray-brown fur, and its eyes shine like 2 wet black stones. The smile is wider than the doll's ever was. There are 9 teeth. Each one is long enough to reach its lower lip. It has not moved towards me. It is only waiting. Behind it, the darkness is opening. I can see another place beyond the wall. There are no stars there, no moon, no ground that I can understand. Only thousands of small shapes sitting in rows, all smiling in the same way. Some look like toys. Others look like children. A few look like adults. One of them looks like me. My daughter has started knocking on the bedroom door. Mum, she is calling. Are you in there? I want to answer. I want to tell her to run. But the creature in the corner has raised one finger to its mouth. The dark opening behind it is getting wider. My headache has stopped completely. For the first time in days, I feel calm. That is what frightens me most. My daughter is still knocking. The creature has stretched out one long hand. In its palm is the small labubu we bought at the shop. Boo looks clean and dry. He is smiling. The creature is waiting for me to take him. I think this is the final part of the promise. I asked him to bring her back. He did. Now he has come to collect me. The lights in the hallway have gone out. My daughter has stopped knocking. A small voice on the other side of the door just whispered, "Mum, don't go." Then another voice spoke from beneath my bed. It sounded exactly like my daughter. "Don't listen to her," it said. "I do not know which one is real. The creature is coming closer. I can see the dark stain beneath its chin. It is not dirt. It is dried blood mixed with tiny gray feathers. The thing has placed Boo on the bed beside me. His fur is warm. I can feel something moving inside him. The 9 teeth are slowly opening. There is darkness behind them. And somewhere deep inside that darkness, hundreds of children are whispering the same words. Best friends forever. Story 4. Let me begin by telling you what kind of woman my grandmother was, because I think that is the most important part of this story. Her name was Eleanor Abernathy, and she was the kindest person I have ever known. She volunteered at the local food bank until she was 82 years old. Even when her knees began to hurt and her hands trembled, she still packed boxes, sorted cans, and helped carry groceries to people's cars. She sent me a handwritten letter every week for 15 years. Sometimes the letters were only a page long, filled with small details about the weather, her garden, or which birds had visited the feeder outside her kitchen window. Other times, she wrote several pages about family history or memories from when she was young. She never forgot a birthday. She never missed a holiday. She remembered every important date in my life, even the ones I forgot myself. She taught me how to bake her apple pie, though mine never tasted quite as good as hers. She showed me how to recognize birds by their songs and how to sew a loose button back onto a shirt. When I was sick, she made soup and sat beside my bed until I fell asleep. When I was afraid, she held my hand and told me that fear always seemed bigger in the dark. Grandmother was gentle and soft-spoken. She was deeply religious, but she never tried to force her beliefs on anyone. She went to church every Sunday and always sat in the third pew from the front. She sang the hymns quietly, her voice so delicate that the person beside her could barely hear it. She never shouted. She never spoke badly about anyone. I cannot remember her saying a cruel word in my entire life. That was why inheriting her house felt like one final gift from her. At the time, I was 27 years old and living in a tiny studio apartment in the city. I was buried under student loan payments and working at a job that made me feel empty. Every morning, I woke before sunrise, traveled through crowded streets, sat behind a desk for 9 hours, and returned home too tired to do anything except eat and sleep. My apartment was so small that I could touch the kitchen counter while sitting on my bed. The farmhouse felt like an escape. I imagined cleaning it, repairing a few things, and selling it. The money could pay off my loans and give me the chance to start over. Perhaps I could leave the city, find better work, and finally feel like my life belonged to me. I believed grandmother had given me freedom. I was wrong. The house stood on 12 acres about 40 miles outside Millbrook, a town so small that it did not even have a traffic light. The property had belonged to our family for more than 100 years. My great-grandfather built the original house. My grandfather added several rooms in the 1950s, giving the place its strange, uneven shape. From the outside, it looked like something from an old photograph. It was a large, two-story farmhouse with peeling white paint, a wide porch that wrapped around the front, and a tin roof that made beautiful music whenever rain fell. The porch sagged in the middle, and some of the windows were slightly crooked, but there was still something charming about it. It looked beautiful from a distance. Standing inside was different. The house felt heavy. The first time I entered after grandmother's funeral, I had the strange feeling that the walls were holding their breath. I arrived on a Friday afternoon near the end of October. The leaves had changed color, covering the land in deep red, orange, and brown. A cold wind moved through the trees and sent dry leaves scratching across the driveway. Grandmother's old oak tree stood in the front yard. Its branches were mostly bare, reaching toward the cloudy sky like dark fingers. The porch swing moved back and forth. There was no one sitting on it. I stood beside my car and watched it for a moment. The wind was blowing, but the movement of the swing seemed too steady, almost as though someone had only just stood up. I told myself not to be foolish. I had spent 2 hours driving, and my back hurt. I wanted to enter the house, make tea, and decide where to begin. The key slid into the front door lock. When I turned it, the lock opened with a satisfying click. I pushed the door inward. The smell reached me immediately. It was the smell of an old house that had been shut for too long. Dust, dry wood, old fabric, and mothballs filled the air. Beneath those familiar smells was something sweeter. It reminded me of dried flowers, but there was also something metallic in it. I could not identify it at the time. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The living room looked exactly as I remembered it. The floral couch stood against the wall. Small white cloths covered the arms and back. Porcelain animals and tiny angels filled the shelves. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, silent as it had been for decades. Grandmother's knitting basket sat beside her favorite chair. A half-finished scarf remained on the needles. The yarn had gathered dust, but it looked as though she could return at any moment and continue working. For a few seconds, I expected to hear her footsteps in the kitchen. The house was so closely connected to her that it was difficult to accept she was gone. I placed my travel bag near the stairs and began walking from room to room. I switched on lights and opened several windows to let fresh air inside. The kitchen had yellow linoleum flooring, a large farmhouse sink, and the cast iron stove Grandmother had used for nearly 50 years. Several jars of dried herbs still sat on the shelf beside the window. The dining room contained a heavy oak table with 8 chairs. Every chair was pushed in neatly. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. Grandmother's bedroom was at the end of the hallway. The 4-poster bed had been made perfectly, even though that was where she had died in her sleep. I stood in the doorway but did not enter. The guest room was empty except for a bed and an old dresser. The last room had always been mine when I visited as a child. Grandmother had never changed it. The same race car bedspread covered the mattress. Faded baseball posters hung on the walls. A box of childhood toys sat beneath the window. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. I slept poorly that first night. The house made noises whenever the wind blew. Floorboards creaked in empty rooms. The roof groaned. Something scratched against the wall beside my bed, though I assumed it was a tree branch. At some point after midnight, I woke because I thought I heard grandmother humming downstairs. I sat up and listened. The sound stopped. I told myself it had been part of a dream. The following morning, I began sorting through the house. I created 3 piles in the living room. Things to keep, things to donate, things to throw away. The work was slow, but there was comfort in it. Every object carried a memory. I found letters my grandfather had sent grandmother during the war. The paper had turned yellow, and some of the words were difficult to read. I discovered photographs of my mother as a baby, her first school report, and the announcement from her graduation. There were birthday cards I had made for grandmother when I was a child. The drawings were made in crayon, and the words were filled with spelling mistakes. She had saved all of them. By Saturday afternoon, I had filled several boxes, but had barely cleared one room. It was around 4 o'clock when I noticed the basement door. It stood at the far end of the downstairs hallway. An old coat rack had been placed in front of it, hiding most of the wood. I had assumed the rack was simply part of the clutter, but when I moved it aside, the door became fully visible. It was made from thick, dark oak. An iron latch covered the lock, and rust had gathered around the edges. Dust covered the surface, but underneath it, I saw carvings. At first, they looked like scratches. When I wiped away the dust with my sleeve, I realized they were symbols. Circles inside larger circles. Lines that curved back into themselves. Geometric shapes that seemed to change when I stared at them too long. Looking at them made pressure build behind my eyes. I remembered the door from childhood. Grandmother had always kept it locked. Once, when I was 7 or 8, I asked her what was in the basement. She smiled and told me it was filled with old junk. Nothing for a little one to worry about, she said. I had accepted the answer. Children are good at forgetting locked doors. But I was no longer a child. The house belonged to me. If I wanted to sell it, buyers and inspectors would need access to every part of the property. I could not ignore an entire basement. The lawyer handling grandmother's will had given me a large ring of keys. There were more than 20, and most of them were old, rusty, and unlabeled. I tried several. One was too large. Another entered the lock, but would not turn. I was nearly ready to give up when I noticed a small brass key near the center of the ring. It was dark with age, but it seemed strangely bright beneath the hallway light. I cannot explain why it caught my attention. Something about it seemed to pull my eyes toward it. When I touched it, my fingers began tingling. I almost dropped it. I considered stopping then. I wish I had. Instead, I placed the key inside the lock. It fit perfectly. The moment I turned it, a deep clunk came from inside the door. The sound traveled through the floor beneath my feet. Cold air escaped through the narrow gap around the frame. It carried the sweet metallic smell I had noticed when I first entered the house. Now it was much stronger. It smelled like old coins mixed with spoiled honey. I pulled the door open. A narrow staircase disappeared into darkness. The steps were made from rough wood. They were warped and cracked with age. There was no railing. The walls were stone, wet with moisture and covered in dark patches of mold. The cold coming from below was powerful enough to make my breath visible. The rest of the house was warm. I found a light switch beside the door and pressed it. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. I used the flashlight on my phone. The beam revealed the first few steps, but the darkness below seemed to swallow the light. I stood at the top for several seconds. Every instinct told me to close the door. Then, I thought about the sale. I thought about inspectors and repairs. I told myself it was only an old basement. I began walking down. The stairs groaned beneath each step. The walls became narrower as I descended, and the ceiling lowered until I had to bend my head. The smell grew stronger. It coated my throat and made swallowing difficult. I counted the steps without meaning to. 10, 15, 20, at 30, I stopped. The basement should not have been that deep. The house was large, but not large enough to hide a staircase that continued so far underground. I looked back. The open doorway above had become a small rectangle of gray light. For one frightening moment, it appeared impossibly far away. I nearly turned around. Then, my phone light revealed the final step. I continued down. My feet touched hard ground. The floor was packed dirt mixed with stones. I raised the phone and moved the beam across the room. What I saw made no sense. The chamber was enormous. It stretched far beyond the boundaries of the house above. The ceiling was high and curved, built from heavy stone blocks. There were no support beams, no pipes, no shelves filled with old furniture or family belongings. Only stone, dirt, and carvings. The symbols covered every wall. There were thousands of them. Some were simple. They looked as though a child had drawn them using a sharp rock. Stick figures stood in circles, but the figures had too many arms and legs. Other carvings were incredibly detailed. Spirals twisted inside one another. Thin lines formed shapes that seemed endless. When I followed one pattern with my eyes, it appeared to move deeper into the wall. Some symbols hurt to look at. They made my eyes water and caused a low ringing in my ears. The worst carvings showed creatures, tall figures with heads bent backward, bodies with faces in their stomachs, long shapes with limbs growing from the wrong places. Whenever I looked at them from the corner of my eye, they seemed to shift. I told myself it was only the unsteady phone light. Then I noticed the door. It stood in the far corner of the chamber. A rotten tarp covered part of it, but most of the metal was visible. The door was small, no larger than the door to a child's bedroom. It had been built directly into the stone wall. The metal was dull gray with green corrosion around the edges. More symbols covered its surface. These were different from the others. They were sharp and angry, cut deeply into the metal. They looked as though someone had carved them quickly and desperately. In the center was a large circle containing 3 connected spirals. Each spiral ended in something shaped like a claw. The moment I saw it, my blood felt cold. I should have left. Instead, I walked closer. My footsteps echoed through the chamber. The temperature dropped with every step. By the time I reached the door, my hands were shaking from the cold. The smell was unbearable. Beneath the scent of metal and sweetness was something rotten. It smelled like old meat and damp earth. The smell of a grave. I raised one hand. My fingers moved toward the metal. Some part of me knew I should not touch it, but another part needed to know whether it was real. The moment my fingertips met the cold surface, I heard scratching. I pulled my hand away. The sound stopped. I held my breath. Nothing moved. I almost convinced myself it had been a rat inside the wall. Then, the scratching began again. It came from the other side of the door. Slow, wet, rhythmic. It sounded like fingernails dragging across metal, but there was something soft beneath the noise, as if the nails were attached to rotting fingers. I stepped backward. The scratching stopped. A voice spoke. "You shouldn't have come down here, sweetheart." My entire body froze. It was grandmother's voice, not a similar voice, not a memory. It was exactly her voice. Soft, warm, gentle. The same way she had spoken whenever she wanted to comfort me. It came from behind the metal door. "I'm sorry," the voice continued. "I'm so sorry." My phone shook in my hand, making the light jump across the wall. "I was supposed to seal it forever," grandmother said. "I thought I had. I could not breathe. But I became old. I became tired. I thought if I stopped coming down here, it would be all right. I thought it might go away." The scratching returned. This time it was louder and faster. The metal door trembled. It pushed outward slightly, as though something enormous was pressing against it from the other side. The central symbol appeared to move. The 3 spirals twisted slowly. I knew that was impossible, but I watched them turn like living things trapped in the metal. "It has been waiting," grandmother said. Her voice sounded sad, so patient. The door shook again. "It knows you are here. It can smell you." I wanted to run, but my legs would not move. I stood only a few feet from the door, trapped by fear. The voice changed. It became deeper. The words still sounded like grandmother, but something else was speaking beneath them. "Open the door, dear." I shook my head. "It has been so long." The scratching became scraping. The metal groaned, so hungry. A faint red light appeared in the center of the symbol. "It needs to feed." The light grew brighter. "It needs to come out." Red liquid began running down the door. At first, I thought it was rust. Then I smelled blood. The liquid dripped from the carvings and flowed across the metal like fresh wounds opening. The temperature dropped even farther. Pain entered my fingers and knees. My teeth began shaking. A growl came from behind the door. It was so low that I felt it before I heard it. The ground vibrated. Dust fell from the stone ceiling. The growl grew louder, passing through the walls and into my bones. It sounded ancient. It carried hunger, hatred, and years of imprisonment. Then the creature screamed. There's no way to describe that sound properly. It was not human. It was not an animal. It sounded like many voices crying out at once. Some were high and frightened. Others were deep and furious. For a moment, I thought I heard children screaming inside it. The sound entered my head like a blade. I screamed, too. The fear finally released my legs. I turned and ran. My shoes slipped on the dirt as I crossed the chamber. Behind me, the metal door bent outward with a thunderous crash. I reached the stairs and began climbing. There had been no railing on the way down, but now my hand found a rough wooden rail attached to the wall. I did not stop to question it. I pulled myself upward, taking several steps at a time. The stairs seemed longer than before. I climbed until my lungs burned. I climbed until my legs felt weak. The doorway above never seemed to come closer. Darkness pressed against me from every direction. The phone light flickered. The sounds below followed me. Scratching, growling, screaming, and grandmother's voice. "Come back, sweetheart." I kept climbing. "You can't leave it alone." A step cracked beneath my foot. My leg fell through, cutting my shin against the wood. I pulled myself free and continued. "It knows you now." The doorway finally grew larger. I reached the top and threw myself into the hallway. I slammed the oak door shut. My hands were so numb that I nearly dropped the keys. The scratching came from the other side, not far below anymore, directly against the basement door. I forced the brass key into the lock and turned it. The lock closed with a heavy sound. I stumbled backward. The door shook in its frame. Grandmother's voice spoke through the wood. "It won't hold, sweetheart." I covered my ears. It has been too long. The carvings on the oak door seem darker now. It is too strong. I backed down the hallway. "You must let it out." The voice no longer sounded loving. "If you don't, it will keep growing. It will break the walls piece by piece." The door shook again. That is why I carved the symbols. That is why I kept it locked. I turned and ran. But I am gone now. I grabbed my car keys from the kitchen, and it is almost free. I rushed through the front door without taking my bag or coat. I did not lock the house. I entered the car, started the engine, and drove. I did not look back. I kept driving until I was more than 20 miles away. I stopped at a roadside motel. The woman at the front desk stared at my bleeding leg and asked whether I needed a hospital. I told her I had fallen. She gave me a room on the second floor. I locked the door, switched on every light, and pushed a chair beneath the handle. That happened 3 days ago. I have not returned to the house. I have barely slept. Whenever I close my eyes, I hear the scratching again. Sometimes I wake with dirt beneath my fingernails. I have begun researching the symbols. I searched through old books online, strange religious websites, and scanned copies of historical documents. I found several symbols that looked similar. Some were connected to old Celtic binding practices. Others appeared in Native American stories about places where evil spirits were trapped beneath the earth. One article described something called a threshold prison. According to the story, early settlers built certain houses over openings where dangerous beings had been sealed. Iron, stone, and carved symbols were used to create a barrier. The symbols had to be renewed. If they were neglected, the prison weakened. Grandmother had grown old. Perhaps she no longer had the strength to maintain them. Perhaps that was why the carvings on the basement door looked faded. I called the lawyer who handled her will. He said Grandmother never mentioned the basement. I asked whether she had ever said anything strange about the house. He laughed. Mrs. Abernathy was a sweet woman, he told me. A little unusual sometimes, but harmless. I asked what he meant. He hesitated. She always said she wanted to be buried in the backyard. I assumed it was just old person talk. Buried in the backyard. The words stayed with me. Grandmother had been buried in the town cemetery beside my grandfather. I attended the funeral. I watched the coffin lowered into the ground. So why had she asked to be buried behind the house? Yesterday I drove back. I told myself I would remain outside. I parked at the end of the driveway and walked toward the property. The house looked darker than before. Every window appeared black, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. The front door remained open. I did not enter. Instead, I walked toward the old oak tree. Recent rain had softened the ground. Near the roots, I noticed a long depression in the earth. It looked like a grave. The dirt had sunk over the years, leaving the shape of something buried below. I stood over it, imagining Grandmother digging there. But the shape was too large to be a small animal. It was long enough for a person. I did not dig. I was too frightened. Still, I knew something was buried there, or something had once been buried there. Maybe the creature in the basement had once been placed in that grave. Maybe grandmother's family moved it into the underground chamber. Or perhaps the grave was meant for her. Maybe her body needed to remain close to the prison for some reason. I heard a noise from the house, a soft knock. One of the upstairs windows opened. Grandmother stood behind the glass. She wore the blue dress she had been buried in. Her face was pale, and her eyes were completely black. She raised one hand and waved. I ran back to the car. Now I am in the motel again. The scratching has stopped, but that does not make me feel safer. I can sense something inside my mind. It feels like pressure against the back of my thoughts. Sometimes I hear words that do not belong to me. Open, home, hungry, last night, footsteps moved through the hallway outside my room. They stopped in front of my door. I looked through the peephole. No one was there. Cold air entered beneath the door. Then I heard grandmother whisper, "Let me in, sweetheart." I pressed both hands over my mouth. "I won't hurt you. I know it is not her. It is using her voice. It is wearing my memories of her like a mask. It knows that I loved her. It knows her voice is the only voice I might trust." Today, I checked my bank account. I do not have enough money to stay at the motel much longer. I cannot return to my apartment in the city. I know the thing will follow me. Perhaps it already has. I found one of the basement symbols scratched into the bathroom mirror this morning. I did not put it there. I called several churches, but no one believed me. One priest offered to speak with me, but when I described the 3 spirals, he became silent and ended the call. I tried contacting people who claimed to understand the supernatural. Most asked for money. One woman listened carefully and told me to burn the house. I asked whether that would kill the thing. She said no. It would destroy the last walls holding it. Then she told me never to call her again. I do not know what to do. I cannot go back. I cannot leave the prison to fail. Whatever is behind that metal door is becoming stronger. Opening the basement may have helped it. Maybe it needed someone from my family to enter. Maybe the brass key was not glowing because of the light. Maybe it wanted me to notice it. The motel lights just flickered. My laptop screen went dark for several seconds. In the reflection, I saw something standing behind me. It was tall and thin. Its body bent in several places where no bone should bend. Too many arms grew from its sides. Where its face should have been, there was only darkness, not shadow. An empty hole that seemed to pull the light toward it. I turned around. Nothing was there. But the motel door is unlocked now. I locked it myself. The chair that was beneath the handle is lying on the floor. It looks as though something pushed it aside without effort. I can hear breathing outside. Slow, deep, patient. The handle has begun to turn. I have pushed the desk against the door, but I do not think it will matter. Grandmother's voice is speaking again. She is singing the hymn she used to sing at church. Her voice is still soft, still beautiful. It is telling me to open the door. It says she is cold. It says she has been alone for so long. I am crying as I write this. Part of me wants to believe it is truly her. That is how it works. It does not force the door open immediately. It waits. It uses love. It uses grief. It makes you want to invite it inside. I think this may be the last thing I ever write. If anyone finds this, do not go to the farmhouse. Do not enter the basement. Do not use the brass key. If you see a door covered in 3 interlocking spirals, stay away from it. And if you hear the voice of someone you loved calling from the other side, do not answer. It is not them. It has never been them. The door is opening now. The room smells like old coins and rotten honey. I can see a hand reaching through the gap. It has too many fingers. Grandmother is still singing. The thing is inside the room. It is looking at me without eyes. And it is very, very hungry. Story 5. 30% of you will fail this class. 60% will receive C's or B's. Only 10% will earn an A. If any of you have a problem with my grading curve, you may leave now and return to your comfortable little lives, where you expect success without effort. The lecture hall became completely silent. Nobody moved. The truth was, we could not leave. This was the final semester before applications opened for the university's psychology program. Social psychology was the last required class most of us needed, and this was the only section that still had available seats. Every other professor had a waiting list long enough to fill another lecture hall. That meant the 40 students sitting in that room were trapped with Dr. Wells. Everyone on campus knew his name. His rating on Rate My Professor was 1.2 out of 5. Former students described him as cruel, arrogant, impossible to please, and emotionally dangerous. More students from his classes had reportedly visited the University Crisis Center during finals week than students from any other class. Some people claimed that was only a rumor. Looking at him on the first day, I believed every word. Social psychology, Dr. Wells continued, walking slowly across the front of the room, is the study of why foolish people behave in foolish ways. He paused beside the projector screen. You all like to believe that you are unique, special, independent. But if we cut the human brain into small enough parts, your behavior becomes simple. Predictable, you do exactly what biology and social pressure tell you to do. That was college in a single speech. In high school, teachers promised that college would treat us like adults. We would be free to think, free to disagree, and free to skip class if we wanted. Then we arrived and discovered that attendance counted for 30% of the grade, that professors could punish us for wearing the wrong clothes, and that disagreement was only welcome when it matched the opinion of the person grading the paper. We were also paying thousands of dollars for the experience. Not that I was bitter. Stand up, Dr. Wells suddenly ordered. A girl in the front row looked around, unsure whether he meant her. Yes, you, he said. Stand. She rose slowly from her seat. She wore shorts and a sleeveless top. Nothing unusual. Half the campus dressed the same way during the warm months. Dr. Wells made a small circle with his finger, telling her to turn and face the class. She obeyed. In my classroom, he said, I expect the highest level of respect. He looked her up and down. Clothing like this, coming into my lecture wearing what is almost underwear. The girl's face turned red. Some students stared at their desks. Others looked at Dr. Wells. He smiled. Even though nearly everyone hated him, nobody could deny that he was handsome. He was tall, well-dressed, and looked younger than he probably was. He had dark hair, a sharp jaw, and the kind of confidence that made people listen even when they disliked him. You are dismissed, he told the girl. Her mouth opened. Dr. Wells, I leave. She grabbed her bag and hurried out of the room. She was crying before the door closed behind her. Dr. Wells turned back to us. The same offer applies to anyone else who objects to my policies. My roommate, Georgia, leaned toward me. Should we go? She whispered. We could wait and apply to the psychology program next year. There's no way we're getting the grades we need with him. I watched Dr. Wells return to the podium. Oh, yes, we are, I whispered back. By the end of our first class, 2 more students had left in tears. One was a boy Dr. Wells accused of being unprepared because he had not purchased the most recent edition of the textbook. The other was a girl who answered a question incorrectly and was forced to stand while he explained every part of why her answer was stupid. Our second lecture had fewer students than the first. By the third week, the number had settled. Only 23 of us remained. According to Dr. Wells's curve, that meant there would probably be 2 A's in the entire class. I planned to earn one of them. Dr. Wells was just as terrible as everyone had warned us. He shouted at anyone who arrived less than 5 minutes early. If a student entered at the exact starting time, he locked the door and marked them absent. He refused to allow laptops. During one lecture, a student continued typing after he had ordered everyone to close their computers. Dr. Wells walked over and slammed the laptop shut while the student's fingers were still near the keyboard. Paper notes only, he said. He called on people without warning. Even if they gave the correct answer, he would narrow his eyes, write something on his clipboard, and ask question after question until they became confused. He did not want to know whether we understood the main idea. He wanted to find the exact point where our knowledge ended. Once he found it, he smiled. If someone became nervous or began to stutter, he laughed. Why did so many ordinary German citizens support the Nazi regime? He asked during the second week. Nobody raised a hand. Because humans value conformity more than morality, he said. You believe you would have resisted. You believe you were different. He looked around the room. You are not. Telling us how weak and predictable we were seemed to be the happiest part of his day. Our first midterm took place only 3 weeks into the semester. I studied harder for that exam than I had studied for anything before. For 3 days, I skipped my other classes. Georgia and I stayed awake through the final night, surrounded by coffee cups, flashcards, and notes. We reviewed every experiment he had mentioned. We memorized dates, names, theories, and definitions. By the time I entered the lecture hall, I felt sick from exhaustion, but confident. Then, Dr. Wells handed out the exam. The multiple-choice questions did not have 4 options. They went from A to K, 11 possible answers for every question. The written section contained complicated essay questions about subjects we had discussed for only a few minutes. Each answer required examples from studies that had never appeared in the textbook. The time limit was 1 hour. When Dr. Wells called time, several people were still writing. He collected the exams with a smile. We received our grades during the next lecture. Georgia stared at the red letter at the top of her paper. No, she whispered. Then louder, no tears filled her eyes. I'm never getting into psych. She covered her mouth and began crying. I placed one hand on her back. It was only the first test. She shook her head. I got an F. I folded my own exam before she could see it. I had earned a C+. It was not a good grade. It was only slightly above the class average, but compared to George's result, I felt almost proud. I think I'll speak to him after class, Georgia said. Maybe he'll allow accommodations because of my dyslexia. He should, I told her. We both knew he probably would not. Dr. Wells had already explained how he felt about what he called special treatment. He said the real world did not care about personal difficulties. Still, Georgia remained after the next lecture. I returned to our dorm alone. I expected her to come back crying. I imagined her describing how Dr. Wells had insulted her and refused to help. Instead, she entered our room quietly. She placed her bag beside the bed and lay down. There was a small, peaceful smile on her face. I looked up from my notes. How did it go? She turned her head toward me. With Dr. Wells. Oh, her smile remained. It went okay. Did he agree to help? He's not as bad as he seems. That was all she said. From the first week, students had started dressing more formally for Dr. Wells's lectures. Most wore business casual clothes. Some students arrived in full suits or dresses because nobody wanted to be publicly shamed the way the girl on the first day had been. By the end of the first month, however, the clothing began to change.